Hello, I'm Mike Gibson. I'm one of the Viking enrichment speakers. We've recently had the major Scottish celebration of Hogmanay, and tonight is Burns Night. So as you can imagine, I'm going to talk about things Scottish. I will start with the history of Highland dress. There are few things more impressive than the swirl of the kilt and the skirl of the pipes. And this clip is from the Edinburgh Military Tattoo. So where did the kilt come from? Well, it originated with this thing called the fillet more, and the meaning of fillet more is great wrap. And basically, it's a large piece of material which was laid out on the ground, and the bottom half was pleated, and then it was belted around the waist. The pleats were to allow free movement, and the remainder was thrown over the shoulders as a cloak. And the ancient Scots had the disconcerting habit of throwing this garment off to charge into battle. So the sight of half-naked Scots on the rampage must have been intimidating, to say the least. But on the left is a modern interpretation of what the fillet more must have looked like, and on the right is a contemporary etching of a fillet more. Now, Lord Mungo Murray, painted in the 1680s, was believed to be the oldest painting of someone in Highland dress. And although it's a fairly dark painting, notice how bulky the whole thing looks. This is confirmed by this painting of John Campbell, Lord Glenorchy, in 1708, and by the piper to the Laird of Grant, painted in 1730. The Duke of Atholl, in 1725, was given authority to raise a private army, and because he wanted them all to be identifiable, he issued them with a checked pattern fillet more, and this checkered pattern gradually evolved into the one you see on the right, which was then known as the government tartan, now known as a Black Watch tartan. It was worn by the 42nd Regiment of Foot, the Black Watch. But to start with, there was no absolutely set family tartan. Each bits of the clan relied on the local tailor to interpret the tartan as he saw fit. And as many of the Highland chiefs hedged their bets during the rebellions against the English by sending people from the clan to fight on both sides, how did you know which side was which? Well, I've highlighted on the left a white cockade, and this is the badge of Bonnie Prince Charlie's supporters. And conversely, this is Major James Fraser, beg your pardon, of Castle Leathers, who's wearing the black cockade of the Hanoverians. And after Prince Charlie's army was soundly defeated at the Battle of Culloden, the government in England enacted a law, and to give it its formal title, it's 19 George 2, Chapter 39, and part of it reads, "No man or boy within that part of Great Britain called Scotland, other than shall be employed as officers or soldiers in His Majesty's forces, shall on any pretence whatsoever wear or put on the clothes commonly called Highland clothes, that is to say the plaid, the philibeg or little kilt, trousers, shoulder belts, or any part whatsoever of what peculiarly belongs to Highland dress, and that no tartan or partly coloured plaid or stuff is to be used for greatcoats or for upper coats, and if any person is convicted thereof, shall suffer imprisonment without bail during the space of 6 months, and being convicted for a second offence, shall be liable to be transported to any of His Majesty's plantations beyond the seas, there to remain for a space of 7 years. And this prohibition also applied to bagpipes, and it wasn't repealed until 1772. So this painting of the brothers Alexander and James MacDonald on the left, there are three possibilities. Firstly, which I think is unlikely, they were officers or soldiers in His Majesty's forces, or they were not in that part of Great Britain commonly called Scotland, or they were actually breaking the law. And the painting of Alexander MacDonald on the right was after the Act was repealed, so that's quite legal. At the time of Prohibition, tartans were hidden away or are actually destroyed. But by 1800, some tartans had been recovered from being hidden away and other tartans had been invented. And this is a book of tartans in the Kelvingrove Museum in Glasgow, which shows on the top left shepherd plaid, which is still used on both sides of the border between Scotland and England, the Sinclair tartan next to it, and on the bottom, Stuart tartan and Cahoon tartan, and they are perfectly recognisable today. We were talking about greatcoats and uppercoats in tartan or plaid, and here are two contemporary ones that are in the National Museum of Scotland. But as you saw, the fillet bag was a large, bulky material. It didn't look very smart and it wasn't very practical. So there was a transition to what was called the fillet bag, the little covering, the small kilt. And it was much more practical. And this cartoon shows two soldiers on duty in Paris after the Battle of Waterloo, exciting the curiosity of Parisian ladies. Apart from being smarter, there are other advantages to the fillet bag. It's warm in winter, it's cool in summer, and if you want to change for different levels of formal dress, you just had changed the top half of your clothing. So I've worn the same kilt gardening in the morning and at a black tie event in the evening. And in addition, if you are silly enough to do as I did when I was a student, go skiing in your kilt, it's a great incentive not to fall over. In 1815, this man, Colonel Alistair Ranaldson MacDonald of Glengarry, set up the Society of True Highlanders, and as he wrote at the time, it was to support the true dress, the language, music and characteristics of our illustrious and ancient race. But the kilt didn't actually become very popular throughout the world, indeed, until King George IV visited Edinburgh in 1822. And the painting on the left is by Sir David Wilkie. It's the 19th century equivalent of Photoshop, because the king didn't look nearly as regal as that. He was actually very stout, and he wore flesh-coloured leggings so that his loyal subjects couldn't see the royal knees. And his kilt was a bit too short. In fact, he looked a bit more like the cartoon on the right. And one lady even said at the time, "Since he's here for such a short time, it is as well we see so much of him." But Sir Walter Scott, who organised the King's visit to Edinburgh, encouraged people to wear what he called their own national dress. And clan chiefs took the opportunity to standardise the tartans so they could be seen as having large bodies of men in the same tartan. Until then, and until very recently, weavers had too much control. They could actually decide how to interpret a tartan. So work was done by Deirdre Kinloch Anderson, and this led to an official register maintained by the Scottish Government under the Scottish Register of Tartans Act 2008. And this specifies the thread count for each colour. Anyone can design and register a tartan for £95, including the certificate, but not the framing. And this is an example certificate with a fake number. There are about 7,000 tartans registered now, and about 150 new ones every year. Any new clan tartan has to be approved by a clan chief. But if, for instance, you wanted to set up a chicken McNugget tartan, you didn't have to get anyone's approval, you just had to pay your money. So here are some odd ones. There is the tartan for Iron Brew, which is Scotland's, some say Scotland's national drink. It's our version of Coca-Cola. There is the tartan for American Express, or for malt whisky, the Glenmorangie tartan. And because I'm a doctor, the Royal College of General Practitioners tartan, which to me looks suspiciously like Dress Gordon. Even my own tartan that I'm wearing today, Buchanan, has lots of modern variants. The older ones are the bottom left, which used to be called Modern Buchanan, and on the top right, which was called Ancient Buchanan. And all these other variations have been registered recently, including the one on the bottom right, which is called, would you believe, Flamingo Buchanan. And even these 12 don't actually cover the kilt that I'm actually wearing tonight, which is Hunting Buchanan, another modern interpretation, but much more subdued than what we used to call the travel rug tartan. I used to say that Buchanan, if people asked what it looked like, I'd say, think of a colour, it's in there. The kilt itself, as you know, is pleated, and the commonest type of pleats are knife pleats, as you see at the top, but Scottish regiments in particular prefer the box pleat, which is the next one down. And there are other types of pleat available, but they're much rarer. And the pleats can be arranged in different ways. On the left is a Mackenzie tartan kilt, where the predominant feature of each pleat is the white vertical stripe. And this is a pattern that tends to be used in regimental kilts. On the right is a kilt in rose tartan, and this has been arranged so that the pattern at the back in the pleats exactly replicates the unpleated part of the kilt at the front. And here we have ancient Douglas tartan, where the horizontal stripes predominate. But you can have other variations. Here is someone modelling a kilt that represents the Scottish flag, the saltire. But you needn't have a tartan kilt. There are pinstripe kilts available and various forms of camouflage pattern kilts as well. So how do you put on a kilt? Well, this clip will show you how.
First, just give it a wee shake to release any creases. Now open the kilt fully behind you with the lining towards you. Then take the strap in your right hand over to your left hip, where you'll find a small slit in the lining for the strap to go through. Now pull this strap through from the outside and fasten it to the buckle you'll find there. Select a hole on the strap that is tight enough to take the whole weight of the kilt on your body, but still loose enough for you to breathe comfortably. Check you can easily get a couple of thumbs inside the waistband, and make sure the length is as you've measured. It should hang no lower than about mid-knee. Now we'll do the straps on your right hand hip. You want to do the top strap first, as this again is taking some of the weight of the kilt on your body, so loose enough to be comfortable but tight enough to be secure. Wait, before the bottom strap, which is mostly decorative, give yourself a final adjustment just to make sure everything is sitting comfortably. And now you can do the bottom strap. Tighten it just enough that the apron is falling nice and straight, neither too loose nor too tight. Then take a good final look over how it's all sitting. Check that the apron is lying flat and you've got a good A shape to it. If you need to, you can rotate the kilt a little to ensure the set of the tartan, its lines, are central and symmetrical as your kilt maker intended.
So here we have a variety of gentlemen wearing a variety of modern kilts, and some of them have flappy pockets, rather akin to the Phillimore. But it does allow me to introduce a song about the kilt sung by Andy Stewart.
I've just come down from the Isle of Skye. I'm no very big and I'm awful shy, and the lassies shout when I go by, Donald, where's your trousers? Let the wind blow high, let the wind blow low, through the streets in my kilt I'll go. All the lassies say hello, Donald, where's your trousers?
And while we're talking about trousers, there's tartan trousers as well, such as worn on the golf course, but of course they can also be used for formal wear, as seen on the left. And the gentleman on the right was photographed at Royal Ascot, making a fashion statement that I personally wouldn't care to make. Of course, the kilt doesn't have any pockets, so you need a man bag or something equivalent. This brings in the sporran. And day sporrans are usually made of leather. Along the top row, you can see them there. Evening sporrans tend to be made of various types of fur, and they're left and right in the centre and bottom right. Pied bands wear long horsehair sporrans, as you can see on the bottom left, and the one in the middle is a badger head sporran, as used to be worn by officers of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. And sporrans are suspended on their own belt. Drummers in the pipe band also have a sporran, but because the drum's hanging in front, they wear their sporran to the side. And while we're talking about pipe bands, let's do a bit of pipe band uniform. The jackets are very heavy barathea with a big epaulet, and the one on the right-hand side is a pipe major's uniform. You can tell by the 4 inverted stripes and the bagpipe insignia on the sleeve. And over this goes the plaid. Now this really harks back to the Phillimore. The plaid is a 9-yard length of material, and it's loosely tacked together in pleats in the middle. And you put it on over your left-hand shoulder with the loose end hanging down to the front, down to our waist level. You wind it round your back, over your left shoulder again where it's secured, and then you spread out the long hanging bit, which hangs down to just below the bottom of the kilt, as a form of cloak. So here we have 2 regimental, on the left pipe major and on the right a drum major. And you can see that in a pipe band, or particularly a regimental pipe band, there's lots of extra bits and pieces as well. There's cross belts and shoulder belts and sashes, and there's a dirk worn on the right-hand hip of the piper. The drum major has a sword on his left-hand side, which the pipe major can't possibly have because it would then interfere with the bagpipes. For evening wear, obviously, as I've said before, you can wear the same sort of length of kilt, not as suggested here. For very formal evening wear, you can wear a fly plaid, which is a half-length plaid. It doesn't get wrapped around the body, and it looks very smart. And there are various types of jacket that you can wear with evening wear. On the left is a Prince Charlie jacket, in the middle is a Montrose jacket in velvet, and on the right is an Argyll jacket, which is a bit like a Montrose jacket, but with flappy pockets hanging down below the belt. The one on the left is wearing a waistcoat, and you can see that's cut on the cross. Same tartan as the kilt, but cut on the cross to provide some difference, a point of interest. You can have it cut exactly the same direction as the kilt, and we'll see an example of that later. And theoretically, you needn't wear a waistcoat and a belt. It's not necessary at all. The kilt will stay up on its own. And when we're talking about waistcoats, theoretically, you can wear a waistcoat of your mother's tartan. So I could wear a Gordon waistcoat with my Buchanan kilt, but I do tend not to because it looks a bit garish. Then we have a Kenmore jacket. Again, can be made in a variety of materials, different colours, and again worn with a waistcoat. Or the one that I'm wearing at the moment, which is a Sheriff Muir jacket. On the left is a waistcoat cut on the cross. On the right is a waistcoat cut in the same sense as the kilt. And this is worn with a jabot, which is just folded layers of lace and secured round the neck at the back by, nowadays, a piece of Velcro. This is an absolutely ideal garment for those people who can't tie bow ties. And in day wear, you wear a tweed jacket with horn buttons. The sleeves have a variety of styles, and for very informal day wear, you can wear a ghillie shirt, such as the one on the bottom left. On your legs, below the kilt, you wear kilt hose, fancy word for socks. And on the right-hand side, you see they can be in plain colour, and in the centre on the left, they can be diced hose, with 2 contrasting colours in a diamond pattern. And next to the dice hose, the second from the left, is a pair of tartan knitted socks. They're very expensive. And in the right-hand sock, you wear a skene dhu, which is translated as the black knife. To keep the security officer on board Viking ships happy, I take a skene dhu that I was given when I was a child, which is a dummy one with no blade. Pipe bands often wear spats, and these have 2 main functions. One is to keep the mud off, because they quite often tramp across muddy fields at Highland Games and things like that. And secondly, tartan and diced hose are very, very expensive. You're talking about £300 for a pair of tartan hose, and very often they're made only down to ankle level with no foot, and the spat covers the gap. On your feet, you can wear either plain Oxford shoes or fancy brogues like these ones with tartan insets, but the commonest one are shown on the bottom, which are the gilly brogues, and they're said to be designed to let the water out more easily if you're tramping across a bog. I think there's a bit of false logic in there because they let the water in just as easily. And on your head, you wear either a Glengarry, as seen on the top and in the middle at the bottom, or a Balmoral, left and right at the bottom. If you are a piper, you can wear in your Glengarry a piper's plume, which is the tail feathers of a black grouse cockbird. Or if you're in a very fancy pipe band, you wear a feather bonnet. And these are very comfortable to wear. They make you feel about they make you stand about 8 feet tall, and there's room on top of your head inside this bonnet to keep your sandwiches, which stops them being crushed inside your sporran. Inside your bonnet, or outside your bonnet, you wear a badge. And if you see people with eagle feathers in the badge, that means they're very important. Eagle feathers obviously are not allowed nowadays. If you see them, they'll be family heirlooms, and they're now replaced by silver feathers on the badge. So the chief of a clan has 3 feathers, the chieftain of a branch of a clan has 2 feathers, the son of a chief has just 1 feather, and if you're just an ordinary humble clansman like me, you wear the clan badge inside a buckled belt. So here we have 4 Highland gentlemen. They're all dressed differently, and they're all dressed perfectly correctly. As long as you don't have your kilt too long, too short, or with the pleats at the front, you can get away with it. So who can wear the kilt? Well, the answer is almost anybody. Here is Hardeep Singh Kohli, born in London with a mellifluous Glaswegian accent. He's a broadcaster, writer, comedian, chef, and as you can see, he's a Sikh, and quite often he wears a matching single colour turban to match one of the main colours in his kilt, and very smart he looks too. And all this brings us to a vital question. The correct answer to that question is what's worn under the kilt? Socks and shoes, of course. And Spike Milligan famously said, "There is nothing worn under the kilt. It's all in perfect working order." Many years ago, I was hitchhiking around Europe, wearing my kilt and carrying my bagpipes with me, and I was drinking in a bar down in a fairly rough part of Hamburg, down by the docks. And a very large German dock worker staggered over to me and said, "Will you settle for me a wager?" And I said, "Of course, but first you must buy me a beer." So off he went, and he came back with a very large stein of beer, which he put in front of me, and I was just bending down to pick up the hem of my kilt when he astonished me by saying, "How many meters of material in your skirt?" Well, the answer to that is 9, of course. But this gives you some idea of what was meant to be worn under the kilt. In days of old, when military tailors were a bit more generous than they are now, shirt tails were long enough to be buttoned together, and that's what the Highland regiments did. And it's said that the Princess Alexandra's father, the Earl of Airlie, is the only regimental colonel to have unkilted a regiment on parade to make sure they were properly dressed, or should I say, properly undressed. Of course, if there are ladies present or if there's Highland dancing going on, you can wear trews. And unlike this tartan jockstrap, which I found on eBay, but you'll be glad to know I didn't buy, trews are a bit like tailored boxer shorts in tartan or in a dark colour. And if it's raining, you can wear an Inverness cape, which is ideal. It doesn't have sleeves, so it lets your arms out to play the bagpipes. But an Inverness cape costs about £1,000. One of the questions I'm often asked is how much a Highland outfit actually costs. And basically, you get what you pay for. You can get a very basic evening outfit with a 6-yard kilt from about £400. With a 9-yard kilt and a really good kilt maker, you can pay up to £3,000. But certainly you can look very smart for about £500. Now then, the Scots men are a bit like the peacocks, and the peahens, the ladies' dress, is a bit easier to describe. We'll start with the evening wear. On the right is a dress worn by Her Majesty the Queen at the Gillies Ball at Balmoral, and you can see it's a very nice white silk dress with a full sash that doesn't go down below the waist, in the Queen's tartan, of course, which is Royal Stewart. The lady on the left is wearing a pleated skirt, a long pleated skirt with a white blouse and a sash over the left shoulder that's secured at the hip by a brooch. Now you'll notice I didn't call it a kilt, I called it a pleated skirt. And this is because, to be absolutely pedantic, I was taught in the 50s that a pleated skirt opens on the left and the kilt opens on the right. And the only lady allowed to wear a kilt is Her Majesty the Queen. Everything else is a pleated skirt, and that's what ladies wear. And for day wear, you can combine tartan with ordinary material, as on the left, or you can wear the Scottish version of a twin set in pearls with a pleated skirt and knitwear, as seen on the right. And for cold weather, we have our version of the poncho, the tonag. Dancers in Highland dancing competitions wear a very stylized form of dress, a velvet jacket, usually with a dress tartan kilt, no sporran, no hat, and dancing pumps on the feet. The tartan obviously now appeals to fashion, and here is a company called Le Kilt displaying at London Fashion Week in 2016. Now let's look at some Scottish celebrations, knees-ups. And I'm going to go through these in chronological order throughout the year, but I'll miss out Burns Night because I'm going to finish with Burns Night. So the first one is Up Helliar, which is held in the Shetland Islands to celebrate the Scandinavian heritage. And this festival has been held on the last Tuesday in January from the 1880s onwards. There are several Up Helliars, but the main one is in the capital of the Shetlands, Lerwick. Every year, a leader called Geyser Jarl is elected, and he has a Jarl squad to help him. And from about October onwards, they build a replica longship, several meters long, 1.8 meters across. The actual day of Up Helliar, there are receptions during the day, but the highlight are the processions at night when 1,000 geysers march through the town with the streetlights turned off and torches are lit. So here is the longship. They circle the longship and then they torch it and send it to Valhalla. Health and safety eat your heart out, but as you can see, you'd expect the fire brigade to be in attendance, and they are. The next one in chronological order is the Jethert ball game. Jethert is the old name for Jedburgh, which is my hometown. This is Jedburgh Abbey, you can see here. There are ball games elsewhere in Scotland too, but the Jethert ball game is held at Candlemas, which is in February each year, and it's been held every year from the 1700s onwards. It starts in the market square, and there are boys and men's games, and the rules are a bit like American football, insofar as there are any rules at all. The whole idea is to smuggle the ball or take the ball across your opponent's goal line. Now, the goal lines are the geographical ends of the town, so it's a huge pitch, so to speak, and there are no restrictions on numbers in each team. There are just two teams, Uppies and Doonies, and the Uppies come into the town for the first time or are born north of the market square, and the Doonies come from the south or are born in the town south of the market square. So I'm a Dooney. It's a fairly rough game. You can tell that from the boarded up windows. You can see that it's not a great spectator sport, but it is great fun to take part in, although, as I suggested, there are a few injuries. There is a myth that this game originated with an Englishman's head, but either Englishmen's heads were much smaller in the 15th century. Certainly the ribbons are meant to represent the hair, but I think that is just a myth. It's an excuse for an enthusiastic bit of hooliganism. The next festival is Beltane, and this is a fire festival to welcome spring. There are Beltane festivals all over the UK, but one of the oldest is at Peebles and the Scottish borders, and there's on record that it was witnessed by King James I of Scotland in the early 15th century. This festival in Peebles died out. It was resurrected like so many other festivals in the 1870s, and it's now combined with May Queen and common riding. Common riding is held throughout the Scottish borders, and there are events that mark the boundaries of what used to be the town's common lands. There are ride-outs on horseback about 6 weeks before the main event, and 2 ride-outs a week lead up to the main festivities. This is the Hawick common riding led by the cornet, and he is carrying a replica of a flag captured from an English raiding party after the Battle of Flodden in the 1500s. The original flag is actually still in the museum in Hawick. Now, Hawick has its cornet, Galashiels has its brolads, Selkirk has its standard bearer, Kelso has the Kelsey laddie, and Jedburgh has its callant. Now, originally, towns in Scotland were allowed to have markets if they were proper boroughs. So Jedburgh was a royal borough from the 12th century onwards. Hawick wasn't actually a borough, so they gave away their common lands to the Duke of Buccleuch in exchange for being made a borough of barony, which allowed them to hold a market. So it's a bit ironic that they still have common riding because they don't have a common anymore. And each event in the common riding in Hawick is led by the singing of the town song, Tiri Bussi Tiri Odin. Now, this gives rise to the name for inhabitants of Hawick who are called Tiris, but the name of the song totally defies translation. Some people think it relates to an invocation of the Norse gods Tyr and Odin, but there's absolutely no evidence for this at all. When I was at high school in Hawick, there were 24 verses to this song. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to play them all for you.
At Flodden field our fathers fought it, and on our gain though dear they bought it. By Teviot side they took this colour, a dear memorial of this their valour.
Up we Hawick's rights and common, up we are the border bowmen, Tiri Bus and Tiri Odin, we are up the
The highlight of the Hawick common riding is the ride out to the Moss Paul Inn, which is 14 miles cross country, and those people who survive getting there and back are allowed to join the ancient order of moss troopers. In Jedburgh, the festivities are led by the callant, and my grandfather and mother rode in the 1949 and 1915 festivals. Their iconic rides are to Hermitage Castle to recreate Mary Queen of Scots' ride from Jedburgh and back to visit her lover, the Earl of Bothwell, who'd been wounded. And the other iconic ride is to Reedswire on the Carter Bar. That's the boundary between Scotland and England, where one of the last armed skirmishes took place in 1575. And there they sing the Jedburgh song. Now, there's a bit of artistic license in the Jedburgh song in that the English knaves didn't invade from Cumberland because this is the border with Northumberland. Throughout Scotland in the summer there are Highland Games, and the first one started with our old friend Captain Alistair MacDonald of Glengarry, and he established a true Highlanders fete in 1816. And this was a combination of athletic events, which were summoned by the sound of the bagpipes, and feasting. And the menu of the day said that the feasting included beef, mutton, venison, haggises, etc., etc. And this led to the current Highland Games. One of the most famous, of course, is the Braemar Gathering, which has been attended by royalty since 1848, and they always seem to have a good time. And Highland Games have a lot of things going on at the same time. It's a bit cacophonous, but one of the major things going on are the trials of strength. Baron de Coubertin, founder of the modern Olympics, was so impressed by a Highland display at the Paris exhibition in 1889 that he introduced the hammer throw, the shot put, and the tug of war to the Olympics. The shot is not the same as the Olympic shot. Each Highland Games has its own shot. There are different weights and different sizes, and usually made of stone. And the hammer isn't the Olympic hammer with a handle at the end and a chain leading to the ball. It's got a wooden shaft instead, which makes it much more difficult to handle. But the most iconic event is tossing the caber. And the whole idea is to lift a large log and throw it into the air so that the end furthest away from you lands on the ground first, and then it falls away from you. And you're marked on how far you throw it and what degree of accuracy you achieve in getting it exactly vertically away from you. A few years ago, when I was serving in the United States, I was asked to represent the British ambassador at the Maryland Celtic Gathering, and they had a caber tossing competition. And unfortunately, no one could lift the caber at the start of it. So our American friends did something that I thought was incredibly pragmatic and incredibly sensible. Out with a chainsaw, and they lopped bits off the caber until someone could lift it, and then they had the competition. Now here is someone doing very well in actually tossing a caber. The tug of war is often competed for amongst the pipe bands taking part. It's great fun on a nice day. If it's a wet, muddy day, you can imagine it's less pleasant. And there are other events like tossing the hay bale over a high bar. And then you've got the Highland dancing competition, pipe band competitions, solo piping competitions. So you can imagine all this going on, plus the announcements for the athletic events. It's quite a cacophony. In August every year, there's the Edinburgh International Festival. It's not just the military tattoo, which we saw a bit of earlier, but it's also an art, music, books, ballet and film festival. And one of the highlights is the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, which features acts from all around the world. And it's often the start of an incredible career, exemplified by Beyond the Fringe, which brought the careers of Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett and Jonathan Miller to the front. And the Fringe is also where Dave's funniest joke of the Fringe competition takes place. And if I can give you an example from a couple of years ago, Dad encouraged me to carry an organ donor card. He's a man after my own heart. Strangely, Scotland's National Day, the 30th of November, St Andrew's Day, is not much celebrated in Scotland. It tends to be more celebrated by Scots outside Scotland. But one of the major events of the year is New Year's Eve, Hogmanay. Hogmanay may have got its name from the Norse Hoganot, when beasts were slaughtered for a winter feast, or I think more likely from the French Uganane, which is a song sung by children going from door to door for New Year gifts. A highlight of Hogmanay is first footing, when you are aimed to be the first person across the threshold of someone else's house. And it's meant to be good luck to be visited by a tall, dark male. And this may date back to Viking times, when to have a blonde stranger with a large axe crossing your threshold meant you were not going to have a very happy new year. When you go first footing, you take some money with you for the household so they're not impoverished in the next year. You take some bread and salt so they don't hunger in the next year. And you used to take some coal or coke so they didn't have fuel poverty. Nowadays, it's more charcoal from the barbecue. But the most important thing is whiskey. And one of the definitions of a Scottish gentleman is someone, if he's pouring you whiskey and says, say when, and you say when, and he doesn't stop pouring, that is a true gentleman. And of course, you pay for it the following day. Of course, when I was a child in Scotland, New Year's Day wasn't a holiday in England, but it was in Scotland. But conversely, Christmas Day wasn't a holiday in Scotland. I remember my father going to work in the mill on Christmas Day. Now let's move on to Burns' suppers. And these are a celebration of the life and works of Scotland's national poet, held on the anniversary of his birth in 1759. He was born in this humble cottage in Alloway in Ayrshire, the eldest of 7 children, and his father was a tenant farmer, and the birthplace is now a museum. It was a hard life. It was typical of many at the time, and the family moved from farm to farm without ever being able to improve their circumstances. But Burns's father was determined that his children should be well educated. He taught them reading, writing, geography, and history himself, and Robert was sent with his brother Gilbert to a local schoolmaster to be taught French, Latin, grammar, and English. Now, you might think English is a bit strange, but his first language would have been the local dialect, Lowland Scots or Lallans, and he was also taught a bit about English literature. Burns wrote his first poem to a girl when he was only 14 years old, and famously he went on to have 12 children by 4 different women. There's a story of Robert and his brother Gilbert watching the cockerel chasing the hens when his mother came out with a bowl of feed, and immediately the cockerel went after the food instead. And Burns said to his brother, "I hope I'm never as hungry as that." But ill luck dogged his father, and William Burns died in 1784, worn out and bankrupt, and Robert took over the work of the farm. This experience helped to form Robert's radical political views, and despite the hard work in all weathers as a ploughman, he found time to observe nature and write poems about it. For instance, To a Mouse, commemorated on the left in the etching, To a Mountain Daisy in the bronze work on the right, and even To a Louse seen on a lady's bonnet at church. But the farm wasn't prospering, and Burns, harassed by insoluble problems, including by now 3 illegitimate children, and constant admonishments from the church about his fornication, thought about emigrating to Jamaica. But fortunately for us, he'd published a volume of his poems at the nearby town of Kilmarnock, entitled Poems Chiefly in the Scottish Dialect, in 1786. And this book was an immediate success. It was appreciated not only by simple country folk, but also sophisticated Edinburgh critics alike. And Burns set out for Edinburgh, where he was lionised. But after 2 years, he was tired of city life and he returned to farming. Again, he wasn't successful. He was also an enthusiastic collector of folk songs, and he was delighted to acquire a shepherd's bone practice chanter, the preliminary to learning the bagpipes. He regarded his work on poetry and on his songs as a service to Scotland, and he refused payment for it. The only major poem he wrote after his Edinburgh visit was Tam O'Shanter in 1791, which we'll come to shortly, and he's said to have written this in an afternoon, laughing aloud as he wrote. To augment his income, he became an exciseman, a form of customs officer, and he had to buy this pair of pistols for protection because customs officers weren't always the most popular people around. He now lived in this house in Dumfries, and he wrote numerous minor poems, and he worked hard to produce 2 song collections, in addition to his work as a customs officer. He was very excited by the outbreak of the French Revolution, and some indiscreet outbursts nearly cost him his job, I suppose the 18th century equivalent of tweets. But his health began to fail, and he died in 1796, aged just 37, on the day that his son Maxwell was born. Well, I said just 37, but if you think that at that time the average Scottish life expectancy was about 35 to 36 years, he didn't do badly after all. He's remembered for many things: his poetry, his collections of old Scots songs, and his political views on equality and fraternity. And now there are more statues around the world dedicated to him than any other non-religious figure other than Christopher Columbus and Queen Victoria. 5 years after he died, 9 gentlemen from Ayr, under the Reverend Hamilton Paul, had a meal together to remember the life and works of their friend. And other towns followed. And the centenary of Burns' birth, as you can see from this graph, resulted in a massive leap in the number of celebrations. The first Burns supper reportedly held in England was on Tyneside in 1804, followed by Oxford University 2 years later, and the first one in London was in 1809, where there were reports of kilts, bagpiping, and Burns's son James entertaining the crowd on a German flute. Basically, you say wherever there was a Scot in the world, there was a chance of a Burns supper. The 250th anniversary of his birth saw more than 9 million people participating in Burns suppers. The Burns Federation was formed in 1885, and this tended to standardize the format. 2018 had over 2,500 Burns events from nearly 150 different countries around the world, including an Antarctica Burns night. But these were just the formal ones registered with the Burns Federations. The Scots are famously canny with the money, and it costs money to register with the Burns Federations. So there are lots of Burns suppers held every year that aren't formally registered. Now, the format of the Burns suppers starts with the Selkirk Grace, and there's some debate as to whether or not Burns composed this grace, but he certainly used it. And I found this version of the Selkirk Grace in a mansion in the Canary Islands, where a Scottish nanny had been employed, and these were painted on the corner beams in her bedroom. And it reads, "Some have meat and cannot eat, and some would eat but want it. But we have meat and we can eat, and so the Lord be thanked." And after that, you start the Burns supper with usually cockaligi soup, which is made of leeks, chicken, barley, and prunes. And then comes the highlight, the haggis. Now, what is a haggis? Well, there's a lovely myth that the haggis is the only four-legged bird in existence, and they live on mountainsides in Scotland, which are so steep that they've evolved into two separate subspecies. Some of them have 2 legs on one side, shorter than 2 legs on the other side, so they can go around the mountain without being at an angle or falling off. And thus there are right-handed haggises and left-handed haggises. And if they interbreed, those that are born with either short legs or long legs can't survive on the mountain. They roll down to the bottom and die. And you catch a haggis when it's in season in January by sneaking up behind it and going, boo. And they jump round and to see who said boo. And now the legs are on the wrong side. They roll down the hill and you catch them in nets at the bottom. The haggis is piped around the room at a Burns supper. It's put in front of the chairman for the evening. It's addressed in Burns's poem to a haggis. It's cut open, it's piped out, and it's served up. The first actual record of a recitation of Burns's poem over a haggis was in Philadelphia in 1824, and the full piping in was recorded in New York in 1848. Now, in this clip of an American Burns supper, note the man in box pleats with his kilt, and the tune the piper is playing is "A Man's a Man for All That," which is one of Burns's songs. The poem to a haggis has 7 verses. I'm only going to give you 2, and to make it easier, I'm going to translate or display a translation into English as I go along, because I'll be doing it in Lowland Scots. And it starts, "Fair for your honest sonsy face, great chieftain of the Puddin race. Aboon the ma ye tak your place, paint tripe of theorem. Leering wordy with grace as langs my airm." And it finishes, "Ye poors for mak mankind your care, and dish them with their bill of fare. All Scotland wants nae skinking ware that jouts and luggies, but if you wish her great for prayer, gie her a haggis." And this is what a haggis actually looks like. It's made from sheep offal, oatmeal, spices, and it's sewn up in a sheep's stomach and boiled. And of course, nowadays you can get vegetarian versions, and instead of a sheep's stomach, it's sewn up in some kind of plastic material instead. You can even buy tinned haggis. And it's served up with what I call neeps, turnips. There are turnips north of the border and in Northumberland, South of there, they tend to be called Swedes. And this originally came from its name when they were first introduced. They were called Swedish turnips. And mashed potatoes, tatties. And I find haggis is often a little dry, so I pour a little blended whiskey over it as a sauce, gives it a lovely flavour and moistens it, but don't waste any malt whiskey on it. After the main course, which this is in Scotland, in England they quite often tend to have roast beef, Aberdeen Angus roast beef as a main course after haggis as an entree. There is a dessert, usually something sweet with raspberries in it, such as cranachan, or you can have oatmeal biscuits and cheese instead. But then comes the main bit of the evening, the clatter, the speeches and the songs. And the speeches always start with the immortal memory of Robert Burns, where they tend to go over his birth, his death, his loves, his children, his jobs, his political leanings, and his 600-odd poems. The immortal memory can be long and turgid, or it can be short and humorous, and guess which I prefer. But they comment on nature. This is a drawing about the louse on a lady's bonnet. They cover his descriptions of pastoral life, his attacks on the church, which was always hectoring him, and one of his famous poems is Holy Wally's Prayer, which is against a rather hypocritical church elder, and Tender Love. And following this, there's quite often a song. Now, I'm not going to sing to you, you'll be glad to know, but I am going to play one of Burns' songs on a set of electronic bagpipes. And this is My Love, She's But a Lassie Yet. And then there is the toast to the lassies. Burns is known to have attended the Tarbolton Bachelors Club, which is from its name male only, but when there they toasted the absent ladies. And for the first 15 years, Burns suppers were also stag events, male only. And the first recorded event attended by men and women on equal terms, and when I say on equal terms, of course, women were always present at these, but usually as waitresses, not sitting down enjoying the banquet. So the first recorded one with men and women there on equal terms was in New York in 1829, and the first one in the UK was in London in 1842. But it has to be said this was the first public banquet of any kind in the UK attended by ladies. Burns certainly loved the lasses. Then following that, there's usually a recitation, either Holy Wally's Prayer, which we've just mentioned, or more often Tam O'Shanter. Tam O'Shanter is obviously a Burns poem, but he made it up really following a true tale. It's about a Douglas Graham of Shanter Farm who habitually got drunk after the market. And on one occasion, he got so drunk that his friends cut off his horse's tail. And on his way home on a very stormy night, he lost his bonnet in which he kept the takings from the market. And he made up the story that Burns wrote the poem about to convince his superstitious wife that he actually wasn't to blame. And again, I'll put up a translation and I'll do little bits of the poem to give you an idea of what it's like. When Shap and Billies leave the street and Ruthie neighbours meet, as market days are wearing late and folk begin to tap the gate, while we sit boozing at the nappy and getting foo and unca happy, we think down the long Scots miles, the mosses, waters, slaps and stiles, that lie between us and her hame, where sits a sulky, sullen dame, gathering her brows like gathering storm, nursing her wrath to keep her warm. Burns then goes from time to time during this poem into little moralizing sections. So on this occasion, Tam O'Shanter is sitting in the bar, exchanging stories and jokes and getting steadily drunker with his friends. So Burns records this as, "Care mad to see a man sae happy, in drooned himself among the nappy. As bees flee hame wi' lades of treasure, the minutes wing their way with pleasure. Kings may be blessed, but Tam was glorious, for all the ills of life victorious. But pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, the bloom is shed. Or like the snowflake in the river, a moment white, then melts wherever. Or like the borealis race, that flit ere ye can point the place. Or like the rainbow's lovely form, vanishing amid the storm. So Tam sets out to ride home on a wild and stormy night, and on his way he passes various ill-omened places, places where murders took place and robberies took place and people committed suicide, this sort of thing. And on his way home, he comes across a coven of witches in Alloway churchyard. One of them is very pretty in a short petticoat, which in Lowland Scots is a cutty sark, which is where the tea clipper, the cutty sark, gets its name. And the music is provided by Old Nick himself in the shape of a beast playing the bagpipes. But Tam can't stop himself from roaring out, "Well done, cutty sark." And obviously then he's chased by all the witches. Now, Tam's horse is called Maggie, and Nanny is the name of the little witch. So Maggie runs, the witches follow, with many an eldritch screech and hollow. Ah, Tam, thou get thy ferrin, in hell they'll roast thee like a heron. In vain thy Kate awaits thy coming, Kate soon will be a woeful woman. Now, witches can't cross running water. So, now do they speedy utmost beg, that's the horse, and reach the keystane of the brig. There at them thy tail may toss, a running stream they dare not cross. But ere the keystane she could make, the fiend to tail she had to shake. For Nanny, far before the rest, hard upon noble Maggie pressed, and flew at Tam with fury a settle. But little wist she Maggie's nettle. A spring brought off her master hale, and left behind her ain grey tail. The carlin caught her by the rump, and left poor Maggie scarce a stump. And then there's the moralizing bit at the end. Now, who this tale of truth shall read, each man and mother's son take heed. Whene'er to drink you are inclined, and cutty sarks run in your mind, think, you may buy the joys are dear. Remember Tam O'Shanter's mare. And after the recitation, the lassies then get their own back. They can reply, and usually it's a humorous speech poking fun at the laddies. But the earliest record of such a reply was in New York in 1876. And the proceedings finish with Auld Lang Syne. And Auld Lang Syne first appears as a closing feature, again in America, in Philadelphia in 1818. And first reference in the UK is in Manchester in 1829. And it became a feature of all Burns suppers by 1859. So, I do hope you enjoyed that account of Scots dress and festivals. I've enjoyed doing this. I look forward to seeing you on board, and thank you very much for joining me.